Today, Pripyat is a ghost town. The exclusion zone is defined by overgrown concrete and rusting monuments to a world that abruptly stopped. The trigger for this massive dead zone was surprisingly mundane, a routine 60-second safety test. A test where the plant's ultimate failsafe button functioned as a detonator. But to understand how we got here, we have to look at what Pripyat was built to be. This was an Atomgrad, a closed, highly privileged nuclear city designed specifically for the workers of the nearby power plant. The average age was just 26, and the supermarkets were fully stocked. The 50,000 people living here trusted the Soviet state completely. They trusted the atom. That absolute faith made them entirely unaware of the fatal engineering flaw lying just 3 kilometers away. The Lenin Power Plant was powered by a massive machine known as the RBMK-1000. It was a reactor uniquely designed by the Soviet Union to pump out massive amounts of electricity for the grid and simultaneously produce plutonium for the military. In this schematic of the RBMK reactor, you can see the massive water pumps that cool the core. If the main power failed, backup diesel generators took a full 60 seconds to spin up. The safety test was designed to see if the spinning down of the main turbine could generate enough residual electricity to bridge that 1-minute gap and keep the cooling water flowing. But the RBMK design harbored a deep physical vulnerability. As you can see here, when the reactor operated at low power levels, the nuclear reaction became difficult to control and dangerously unstable. The test began on April 25th with a slow reduction in power. Then, a call came from the dispatcher in Kyiv. Another regional plant had gone offline, and the city desperately needed electricity. The test was ordered to halt. For 9 hours, the reactor sat idling at half power. That extended delay forced the machine into an incredibly precarious state, setting a trap for an inexperienced night shift that was about to clock in. At midnight, the test was handed over to a skeleton night shift. Supervising them was Anatoly Dyalov, the deputy chief engineer. He was a strict, uncompromising boss who demanded the test be completed that night, regardless of the delays. Looking at the reactor core again, we can see the consequence of that 9-hour idle. A radioactive gas called Xenon 135, a natural byproduct of nuclear fission, had slowly built up inside. Xenon acts as a reactor poison. It absorbs neutrons, essentially suffocating the nuclear chain reaction. When the young engineers tried to lower the power to the required test parameters, the system stalled out entirely. The heavily poisoned core caused the power to plummet, bottoming out at barely 30 megawatts. Standard safety protocols stated clearly that the test had to be aborted, requiring an immediate 24-hour shutdown to let the xenon gas naturally decay. Dyatlov refused. Aborting the test meant missing strict production quotas and explaining a failure to his superiors. He threatened to fire the young engineers on the spot if they didn't force the power back up. To fight the xenon poison and raise the power, the engineers had to remove the control rods. These rods are the physical brakes of the reactor. They absorb neutrons to slow the fission process down. Under intense pressure, the operators pulled almost all 211 control rods completely out of the core. Bureaucratic intimidation overrode basic physics. They were now operating a massively unstable machine with the accelerator pressed firmly to the floor, driving uphill against the xenon gas with absolutely no brakes. At 1:23 a.m., the engineers stabilized the reactor just enough to proceed. They shut off the steam to the main turbines, and the safety test officially began. As the turbines spun down, the massive water pumps began to slow. Less water flowed through the core. In this schematic of the fuel channels, we can see the liquid cooling water rapidly boiling into pockets of steam, known to physicists as voids. Liquid water absorbs neutrons, but steam does not. So as more voids formed, fewer neutrons were absorbed. That caused the nuclear reaction to speed up. A faster reaction generated more heat, which boiled more water, creating even more steam. It was an unstoppable, runaway feedback loop. By its very physical design, the RBMK turned the loss of cooling water, a highly dangerous event for any reactor, into a massive exponential accelerant. Within seconds, the shift foreman, Alexander Akimov, realized the power was surging wildly out of control. To force an immediate full shutdown, he violently slammed his finger onto the emergency scram button, labeled AZ5. Pressing AZ5 was supposed to drop all the control rods back in at once, but this schematic highlights the RBMK's final, heavily guarded state secret. To make the rods slide into the core faster, their tips were made of graphite, and unlike the boron in the rest of the rod, graphite actively accelerates a nuclear reaction. As the massive rods descended, those graphite tips entered the core simultaneously, displacing the last remaining pockets of liquid cooling water. Instead of acting as the brakes, pressing the failsafe button acted as a detonator. The power surged to nearly 100 times the reactor's design capacity. The cooling water flashed instantly into steam. The resulting unimaginable pressure caused two immense explosions, blowing the 1,000-ton concrete biological shield clean off the roof and exposing the glowing nuclear core directly to the night air. The system's ultimate safety mechanism was, in harsh reality, the precise trigger that destroyed the plant. Inside the ruined control room, the air tasted of metal, the physical sensation of massive radiation exposure. Despite the missing roof and severed communication lines, Anatoly Dyatlov descended into strict cognitive dissonance, insisting to his superiors that the reactor core was still fully intact. Within minutes, first responders from Pripyat arrived. They had been dispatched to handle what they were told was a standard electrical roof fire. They wore canvas coats and leather boots. They had no respirators and no lead-lined suits. As they fought the flames, the men kicked aside strange, shimmering black blocks on the roof. They had no idea they were handling highly radioactive reactor graphite. Above them, an ethereal, bright blue beam shot into the sky, Cherenkov radiation. They fought fires while bathed directly in a lethal, invisible glow. Within half an hour, the severe symptoms of acute radiation syndrome set in. The sudden, severe dizziness, the unquenchable thirst, the dark reddening of their skin. The men suffered rapid thermal burns, while simultaneously the massive radiation exposure violently destroyed their physical cells at a molecular level. The rigidly enforced state dogma dictated that an RBMK reactor could never explode. By clinging to that impossibility, leadership blindly sacrificed their own first responders to an invisible fire. A few kilometers away, the sun rose on a beautiful, warm Saturday morning in Pripyat. Families went out and children played in the streets, totally oblivious to the smoldering wreckage nearby. No warning siren sounded, not a single evacuation order was issued. Paralyzed by a culture of fear, local officials chose to wait quietly for instructions from Moscow rather than report a disaster of this magnitude. As the city enjoyed the weekend, the exposed reactor crater acted like a volcano. It continuously pumped millions of curies of deadly radioactive isotopes directly into the atmosphere, showering the civilians below. The local cover-up held temporarily, but the sheer volume of radio traffic couldn't be hidden forever. Thousands of miles away in Moscow, General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev and the Kremlin began to realize the apocalyptic scale of the event they were desperately trying to contain. A mechanical flaw triggered the explosion, but a deeply ingrained culture of absolute secrecy and top-down denial turned it into a generational catastrophe. The battle to clean up the exclusion zone would take decades,